the government results do echo our findings. We did a survey starting in August. It ran for about 6 weeks. As part of our Stand Up for Quality Education campaign, we're looking at pupil behaviours, workload and additional support needs. And the feedback we got from our members is quite stark. 82% of our branches who responded say that their members are subject to a violent and aggressive incident at least once a week. And we know that for some of our members, that's happening on a daily basis. There's a rise across primary and across secondary. And it's quite stark. Over 70% of our members have indicated that they would leave the profession.
So people will leave. Teachers are leaving or want to leave because of this rise in violence. I mean, we all went to school. I mean, give us a flavour or an idea of some of the nature of the behaviours that you're hearing about.
So we're hearing about verbal abuse. We're hearing about physical abuse, biting and kicking and scratching and punching. We're hearing about misogynistic behaviours. Our male pupils towards our female staff, misogynistic and sexualised language towards our female teachers. And that's on the increase. That has been on the increase anecdotally. We knew that, but we now have the stats and the government have the statistics to back that up too. So now we need action from the government.
An action from the government. I mean, but this is kind of, and you know, the question is, where's it coming from? I mean, is this social media? Is this times are changing in terms of, because I guess for you and I mean, being at school, I mean, you respected teachers, you know, you looked up to your teachers, but I mean, to verbally abuse or even physically assault a teacher, it's something that I guess my generation, I'm not too old, but I mean, it's something I'd never have dreamt of. But do you think it's attitudes, times are changing, students thinking, well, you know, what could a teacher do if I decide to swear at them or kick them or hit them? Or what do you think is the changing behaviour with the students?
I think there's a whole range. I think probably everything that you've outlined is part of it. I think we were seeing a rise in violence and aggression before the pandemic, but coming back from lockdowns and coming back from that delay in socialisation and developmental and societal changes, you know, we've got whole cohorts of secondary pupils who spent their puberty in lockdown. So there are developmental lags, we know that, but we also have an increasing additional support needs cohort in our schools. In 2009, 4% of our school pupils had a recognised and diagnosed additional support need. That number is now 34%. So 1 in 3 of our pupils in classes has a recognised additional support need. So when our young people are lashing out in the way they are, either verbally or physically, that is an additional support need, whether it's recognised or diagnosed or not. At that point in their lives, they are reaching out to us in the only way they know how. But what we're finding is that our support services have been slashed by budget cuts. So there isn't the wider systemic support that we used to have. We need an increase in educational psychologists. We need an increase in social workers. We need an increase in health support. Mental health supports for our young people too. We know that mental health problems in our young people is on the increase. All of that takes funding. The government has promised 3,500 more teachers by the end of this Parliament. We need to see those teachers coming into the system. We need more pupil support assistants in the system too, so that it's all of that and more, I think, that's causing the rise in violence and aggression that we're seeing.
Well, the Scottish Government has announced £900,000 of cash for councils to help train school staff to deal with some of the challenges your members face. I mean, how far will that go?
Not nearly far enough. £900,000 is roughly £360 per school. If you're a small primary with 10 teachers, that's £36 a head in training. And I don't think our teachers need trained. We know the strategies that need to be put in place. We know how to deal with violent and aggressive behaviour. We don't have the capacity in the system to allow us to do that properly, which goes back to what I said earlier about that wider systemic funding that needs to be in place. giving us funding to train teachers puts the blame on this violence and aggression onto teachers. We don't go to work to get hurt. Work shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't hurt us physically, and it shouldn't hurt us emotionally. And our research results show that it does. It's a much wider systemic and societal change that needs to happen. All of that is manifesting itself in schools, absolutely, and schools have their part to play, but there are wider societal issues that need to be addressed too.
And aggression, disruptive and violent behaviour is clearly not just an issue in schools, even though it has a direct impact within schools. So presumably it needs to be tackled more widely in society. But I mean, Paula, where do you even begin?
That's above my pay grade to know where to begin. I think we need to tackle poverty. We need to tackle the cost of living crisis. We need to tackle the misogynistic behaviours that our young people are seeing on social media, because that misogynistic attitude doesn't just impact on the behaviours that we are seeing, it also impacts on our boys' attendance and their attainment and their willingness to learn. All of that needs to be addressed.
And Paula, I guess I worked with a lot of young people in the capital, in London and England, and a lot of them had been excluded quite quickly. I guess some schools just don't have the capacity to work longer term with these young people to kind of address the issues, the behavioural issues, because they're, classes of 30, 35 students, budgets, cuts, council cuts, austerity. So exclusion is often, some parents have criticised some schools for excluding their kids too quickly, and then they end up falling off, and then that system is kind of on the peripheries of drifting and then heading into a life of crime, gangs and all of that. But a lot of those kids say they were excluded too quickly. What was your kind of answer to that kind of issue? Is that an issue, and schools excluding too quickly just because they can't deal with it, or it's so severe they have to be excluded, these pupils?
So I don't think it's always a case that exclusions happen too quickly. I think sometimes our members feel that it happens too slowly, that it doesn't happen enough. Exclusion should always be a measure of last resort, because our young people are entitled and should be in education and should be in school. One of the issues that has come out through our research is the inconsistent approach to support for staff and for pupils across schools. So we have 32 local authorities in Scotland who all have their own reporting and recording systems, who all have their own exclusion policies, who all have their own support systems in place. And it isn't only inconsistent across those authorities, but there will also be inconsistencies within authorities. So different schools will deal with behaviour policies and exclusion policies in different ways. So we are looking for a more consistent approach across the country to the recording and the reporting and the support that is available. And you're absolutely right, that's capacity. So our survey results have shown that our members aren't saying that restorative practices don't work. What they're saying is we don't have time to do restorative practice properly. We don't have time to do it justice. There isn't the capacity in the system to allow us to go and speak to a pupil, to build those relationships, to mend a relationship that's maybe broken down. We don't have time to debrief after there's been an incident. We don't have time to allow staff, pupils have time to re-regulate after they've been dysregulated. Staff aren't allowed that time. And all of that is because of the capacity in the system.
And just lastly, Paula, in terms of what more could the Scottish Government do? I mean, you've kind of alluded to it there, and cash isn't always the cash helps, but it's more support and staffing, one is assuming.
Yes, absolutely. Cash does help. It's where the cash is targeted and streamed towards. So our Stand Up for Quality Education campaign is very clear on the results of this pupil behaviour and the funding that needs to go into the wider system, but also that funding needs to go to the pupils with that identified additional support needs. Now, not all children with an identified additional support need are violent or aggressive. We totally understand that. But if 1 in 3 of our pupils in classrooms have a recognised diagnosed condition, they need to be supported. The kids who are lashing out in these verbal or physical ways need to be supported. It's capacity in the system. This will always come back to giving schools and authorities the time and the money to make the space to get it right for every child, which is the ambition for Scottish Government.
Well,